Hello, 6th grade. In the last video, we talked about how to divide decimals by whole numbers. In this video, we're going to continue talking about decimal division, but in this one, we'll look at decimals divided by decimals. I have some steps up in this box and some blanks that we're going to fill in, but I think it's going to be easiest just to start an example and fill in the blanks as we go. So we're going to start here with number 1 with the problem 18.45 divided by 0.05. So I'm going to set this up just like I did in the last video. 18.45 is my dividend, so it goes inside my long division house. And then this time the divisor is also a decimal, and we have 0.05. So now let's go ahead and let's look at these steps that I have up in this box. The first step, number 1, set up a long division problem. We've done that already. The second step is to move the decimal in the divisor. And again, the divisor is your number outside your long division house to the right until it becomes a whole number. So let's look at that for number 1. Our divisor for this problem is 0.05. So we need to move our decimal point to the right until this number becomes a whole number. So if I take my decimal point and I move it one place to the right, I get 0.5. That's still not a whole number, so now I need to move this decimal point 2 places to the right to get the number 5. Once I've moved that decimal point 2 places to the right, I can stop since I have now a whole number 5. So now, just for my benefit, I'm going to erase the 0 that I have here. And so you can see we're just dividing by the number 5. Let's go back up to the steps in our box because now we need to look at our next step. Once we've moved the decimal point in the divisor, we also need to move the decimal point in the dividend. And we move that decimal point the same number of places as the one we moved in the divisor. So I'm going to take this decimal point in my dividend, and I'm also going to move it 2 places, 1 and 2, to the right. So now this decimal point is to the right of my 5 and not between my 8 and my 4. So now I'm going to go ahead and erase that decimal point from being between my 8 and my 4. If you need to, you can add zeros into any empty spaces in your dividend as necessary. So if we had to keep going with this decimal point, we could have just added zeros here in these spaces. And so now we're ready to divide. So now you're going to treat this like the problem 1,845 divided by 5. Let's go ahead and let's place the decimal point in our quotient before we start dividing though. Remember from our last video that in our quotient, the decimal point goes directly above the decimal point in the dividend. Well, in the dividend, my decimal point is now here to the right of 5. So in my quotient, my decimal point will go here. So now I'm going to take 5 into, I can't take 5 into 1, so I'll take 5 into 18. 5 goes into 18 3 whole times. So I'm going to place a 3 here and multiply. 3 times 5 is 15. I subtract, and I get 3. Now I can bring down this 4, and I can take 5 into 34. 5 will go into 34 6 whole times. 6 times 5 is 30. I can subtract, and I get 4. Time to bring down my 5. 5 will go into 45 9 whole times. 9 times 5 is 45. I subtract and I get a 0. So that means I'm done dividing, and that means my answer to this problem is a whole number. I get 369 for my answer. There's nothing to the right of the decimal point, so I don't even need to include the decimal point in this answer. Okay, let's look at the next problem, 6.15 divided by 0.5. So in this problem, again, I need to set it up like a long division problem with 6.15 inside my long division house. and 0.5 on the outside. My first step is to take my decimal point in my divisor and move it to the right until I get a whole number. In this case, I only have to move it one space. So now I'll do the same thing in my dividend. I'll take that decimal point, I'll move it one place to the right, and so now it is in between 1 and 5. So now, in my quotient, I'm going to place my decimal point directly above that decimal point that I moved. So now it's time to divide. Now I can treat this as 5 going into 615. I really don't need this 0 here in my divisor anymore. So let's take 5 into 6. 5 will go into 6 one whole time. 1 times 5 is 5. I subtract and I get a 1. And now I bring down my 1. 5 into 11. 5 will go into 11 2 whole times. 2 times 5 is 10. I subtract and again I get a 1. And now I'll bring down my 5 to get 15. 5 will go into 15 3 whole times, so we place a 3 in our tenths place to the right of the decimal point, and 3 times 5 is exactly 15. So we're done dividing, and the answer here is 12.3. One thing I forgot to fill in your box up here, it's the same step as the last step in your last video, is remember to place the decimal in the quotient directly above the decimal point in the dividend. Okay, let's go to the back side and look at those other examples. Number 3, we have 3,614.6, and we're dividing that by 0.22. So again, I'll set up my long division house. 3,614.6 goes here, and then my divisor is 0.22. I need to move the decimal point in my divisor to the right until I get a whole number, so I'm going to take that decimal point and I'll move it 1 and 2 places to the right. And so now I'll do the same thing with the decimal point in my dividend. If I move it one place, it's now to the right of my 6. If I move it a second place, then I need to add a 0 in what is now the ones position. So I have to add a 0 in my dividend here to move that decimal point 2 places. And so now I'm dividing 22 into this large number, 361,460. So let me place my decimal point in my quotient. It's going to go here. And so now we're going to divide like normal. We have the 2-digit number 22, and I can take 22 into my 2-digit number 36. I can take it one whole time. So that 1 is going to go directly above this 6. 1 times 22 is 22. I subtract, and I get a 14. Now I bring down my 1, and I try to take 22 into 141. This is where estimation will be helpful. Think about how many times 20, which is close to 22, will go into 140. 20 will go into 147 times, but if we take 22 times 7, we're going to get more than 141. We get 154. So we need to do 22 times 6. 22 will go into 141 6 whole times, and 22 times 6 is 132. So that's what I'll subtract here. When I subtract those numbers, I get a 9, and so now I'll bring down my 4, and now I'm going to take 22 into 94. 22 will go into 94 4 whole times. 4 times 22 is 88. And so now I subtract, and I get a 6. I'll bring down this 6, and now take 22 into 66. 22 will go into 66 3 whole times. 3 times 22 is exactly 66, and so now I subtract and I get a 0. Now, because we have not gotten to our decimal point yet, I still have this one space here. I need to keep dividing and take 22 into 0. Well, 22 goes into 0 times. Even after I bring down this 0 here, this number is still 0. So because 22 goes into 0 times, I just place a 0 in my ones position here. 0 times 22 is 0. And so now when I subtract, I see that I'm done. So my answer here is 16,430, another whole number for my answer. Okay, the last problem, we have 21.901, and I'm dividing that by 3.62. So I'm going to write the problem just like this. I'll take 21.901, place that inside my division house, and then 3.62 goes on the outside. The decimal in 3.62 needs to move 2 places to the right, and so does the decimal point in 21.901, so it goes here between the 0 and the 1. So now in my quotient, I'm going to place my decimal point here, and now I have a 3-digit number, 362, that I'm trying to divide into this number. Let's look at the first 3 digits. My first 3 digits are 219. I know 362 cannot go into 219, so now I try to take 362 into 2,190. So again, I need to use some estimation skills. I know 362 is between 300 and 400. 400 will go into 2,000, which is close to 2,190, 5 times. So let's see if 362 might go into this 6 times. So I'm going to take 362 times 6, and when I do that, I get 2,172. Since this is smaller than 2,190, that means 362 will go in 6 times, so I place my 6 above my 0 in my ones place, and now I can multiply, which I did already, and subtract. So my difference here is 18, and now I can bring down this 1. Now we have 362 that I'm trying to divide into 181. Because 362 is larger than 181, it won't go in, so I need to place a 0 in my 10th place here, and multiply 0 times 362, which is just 0. So if I subtract here, I still get 181. Now I can add a 0 to the right of this 1 and bring that down, and I can take 362 into 1,810. I know 362 times 6 is too big, so let's try 362 times 5. 362 times 5 is going to be exactly 1,810, so that means I can place a 5 here in my 100th spot and multiply, subtract, and get 0, which means I'm done dividing, and my answer is 6.05. If you had any questions, 6th grade, over this video, make sure you have those written down for the next time you have class. And until then, have a nice day. You're all wonderful people. Take care.